to warmly welcome you to tonight's lecture. Tonight we enter a new decade in this series, a lecture series instituted in memory of the founding rector of Akrofo Christian Institute, very late Reverend Professor Kwame Bediako. As I am supposed to simply say a word, and as I reflected on the subject that our speaker intends to speak on, I couldn't help but recall how important language was for Professor Bediako. He knew so many languages: biblical languages, Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, international languages, English, French, maybe others. And of course, local languages. So we gather tonight to honor his memory, and it affords us an opportunity to reflect on his legacy. And I'm sure some of the things that Professor Lai will be sharing with us will bring back memories about the kind of importance that Kwame Bediako attached to language. On that note, once again, you are most welcome, and I'm sure we'll all leave here blessed and appreciate afresh the importance of language for our self-identity and for our progress as a people. Thank you, and may God bless our time together tonight.
Thank you, Rector. It's now my pleasure to introduce the speaker for tonight. Reverend Professor Philip Tetelai had his secondary school education at the Presbyterian Boys Secondary School, Presec, Lagos. Thereafter, following the call to serve the church, he enrolled in the Trinity College, Lagos, where he received a diploma in theology in 1985. He went on to receive a BA Honors from the University of Ghana in 1989. Subsequently, he received an MPH in 2001 from the University of Natal and a PhD from the School of Religion and Theology, University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa in 2006. Presently, Reverend Professor Lai is Associate Professor of African Theology at Akrofo Christian Institute at Kwame. He is also the Dean of Accredited Studies. Reverend Professor Lai had research and scholarship deal with African agency and initiatives in Christianity. Both his MTH and PhD dissertations, since published in several forms, promote African Christianity by using the epistemology of African worldviews and philosophy. His PhD dissertation was entitled Saint Ignatius of Antioch and Efua Kuma of Kwao, a study in some images of Jesus in 2nd century Christianity and modern African Christianity. His PhD thesis was Christianity as Vernacular Religion, a study in the theological significance of mother tongue apprehension of the Christian faith in West Africa, with particular reference to the works of Ephraim Amu, 1899 to 1995. Reverend Professor Lai has numerous publications to his credit, I'll just mention a few. Some of these will give me trouble because they are in Ghana, and I know some of you don't understand Ghana. Ephraim Amo, nationalist, poet, and theologian, 1899, 1995, in 2012. This one, Yesu. So I will end it there and go on. For your sake, Jesus, Lord of Homowo, a reinterpretation of the history and religion of the Ga people from the standpoint of Jesus as Lord. 2005. And patriotism and nation-building perspectives from the life and utterances of Ephraim Amo, 2017. Overall, he has published more than 25 articles in journals and edited volumes. Furthermore, he has delivered about 20 well-received lectures around the world, focusing on Africanizing Christianity in Africa to benefit Africans. Apart from his academic work, Reverend Professor Lai has been vigorously involved in the Presbyterian Church of Ghana and has served as a minister of the church in several districts since 1989. Reverend Professor Lai is married to Ruth, and they have 3 children: Esther Afole Lai, Theophilus Afote Lai, and Isaac Ni Lai. Now, after that hard work, ladies and gentlemen, come on, put your hands together and let's welcome Reverend Professor
Thank you, Council Chairman, for the kind words about me. I must say that I'm most privileged to be asked to give the 11th in the series of the Kwame Bediako Memorial Lectures. And I accepted to do this with an utmost sense of trepidation, knowing very well that I stand in the shoes of a great man by all standards, a mentor, a teacher, and an inspirer. The rector has welcomed all of you, but I just want to give a few acknowledgements. And I'd like to recognize the presence of my head of family, Ni Udate Chewi, Ni Ago Kusuno, and his entourage. Ni Hamanye. Here with members of the family to support me in this lecture. And I also acknowledge friends and well-wishers, ministers of the gospel, my own colleagues who are here today to be part of this lecture. Mr. Chairman, I elected to speak on a topic that focuses on the importance of language, a subject that occupied the attention of Professor Kwame Bediako and for which he was passionate about for many years. The second reason I chose this topic is because this year, 2019, has been declared by UNESCO as the International Year for the Celebration of Indigenous Languages. And as part of this lecture, the Akrufi Crystal Institute is showcasing a collection of indigenous literature of the 19th century. And so during the course of the lecture, you see projected on the screen, and I hope that this works, illustrating some sections of the lecture. As the chairman noted, this is about language. And since you do not have the script before you, sometimes you'll be lost. I do hope that I can accompany you by projecting a few of the things on the screen so you can come along with me. On this occasion, I'd like to pay a glowing tribute to Professor Kwame Bediako and acknowledge in particular his advocacy for the use of the mother tongue that shaped my own orientation into language use in theological discourse. His incessant calls for African theologians to take the mother tongue seriously was partly responsible for my writing in the Ga language, although I must admit that it was the Kenyan novelist, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who finally tipped the scales and provided the coup de grace. My book, Yesu Homo Wonuncho, and Chairman, I'll pronounce it for you. Yesu Homo Wonuncho, published by Regnum Africa in 2005, was a result of a challenge Professor Bediako threw me in one of our informal discussions. He told me that I shouldn't go through my PhD program without writing anything on the Homo Festival of the Ga people. Not only did I accept the challenge, I also decided to write in Ga. He may have forgotten about the challenge until I walked into his office one day with a manuscript written entirely in the Ga language. He accepted to write the foreword, and he also sourced funding for the book, a gesture for which I'm forever grateful. Mr. Chairman, in this lecture, I propose to give a brief historical background of the role played by Danish merchants, chaplains, colonial officers, and the Basel Mission in the development and use of the Ga language. I will use Ga, and in some cases Twi, to illustrate how indigenous languages have shaped the destiny and development of the Ghanaian people, and discuss some of the gains that have inured to the benefit of the Ga people, in particular, and the difficulties encountered. So I give a historical review. H.O. McWilliam, a former principal of the Government Training College, Tamale, noted in his book, The Development of Education in Ghana, published in 1959, a statement attributed to Reverend Metcalf Sonta, who was the first inspector of schools in Gold Coast and Lagos, that an African language was, quote, never likely to become of any practical use in civilization. To be sure, Inspector Santa's statement belonged to a European value setting of subject peoples. The inspector's idea owes to a certain mindset of the mid-19th century in Europe, a period during which armchair anthropologists and scientists of the emerging disciplines in the humanities sought to explain through some dubious theories the so-called differences among the human species. These racial theories worked their way into the sphere of linguistics in the 19th century, and in particular Germany, where specific features of African languages were often interpreted as linguistic correlates of the inherent inferiority of their speakers' moral and intellectual development. In other words, it was assumed that the linguistic potential of a people is a function of the evolutionary advancement and the growth they have attained to at any point in time in their march to progress. The backwardness of primitive societies, including those in Africa, according to European scholars, was mirrored in their languages, which were so impoverished and therefore incapable of advancing the cause of these societies. As noted by Thomas Bell, this philosophy lent scientific legitimacy to the everyday discrimination against African languages on the part of colonial officials. 19th century missionary bodies differed markedly from these pervasive and negative ideologies. The Basel and Bremen missionary societies, for instance, had clear language policies and guidelines for missionaries they sent to the Gold Coast. It was in keeping faith with these instructions that Johannes Zimmermann, Johannes Christaller, all of the Basel Mission, and Dietrich Westermann from the Bremen Mission applied themselves rigorously to learning the Ga, Twi, and Ewe languages, respectively, and pioneered the production of what have now become literary monuments of immense benefit to the Ghanaian people in general and to scholarship in particular. The Bible, dictionaries, grammar books, and other school textbooks, and the documentation of folkloric traditions. As I've already noted, I use Ga as a case study to illustrate some of the key features in the use of indigenous languages in education and nation building, and the difficulties encountered in this noble venture. In addressing this topic, I seek first to create a historical and intellectual framework in which to situate my lecture. Historically speaking, the Ga people inherited a mixed fortune from explorers, merchants, missionaries, and colonial regimes that plied their trade along the coastal belts of the Gold Coast, particularly in the period between the 17th and 19th centuries. Several treatises were written in the languages of the empire builders, purporting to give a true and reliable account of the coast of Guinea. Some of these accounts were sparsely littered with few words and phrases written with orthographs that made pronunciation problematic. These include memoirs of the Danish merchant F.L. Romer, two Danish chaplains, Johannes Rask and H.C. Monrad, and Paul Edmund Isaac, a Danish-German physician. A useful introduction to two hitherto unknown languages, Infancy and Accra, published in 1764 by the Moravian missionary Christian Proten, represents a more pragmatic approach to the study of the Ga language. Then followed in 1828 a guide to the Accra language, Ga, on the coast of Guinea, jointly authored by the Danish philologists Rasmus Rask and Frederick Noidawona, a citizen of the Gold Coast and a royal from Osu. In 1843, the British and Foreign Bible Societies published a translation of two books of the New Testament, Matthew and John, into the language by a Ga indigene, A.W. Hansen. This appealed to an individual effort compared to the translation of the remaining books of the Bible spearheaded by the German missionary Johannes Zimmermann. This period witnessed a flowering of Ga literacy, beginning with the publication in 1858 of Johannes Zimmermann's A Grammatical Sketch of the Accra or Ga language, which comprised a grammar book, a dictionary, historical accounts, and a collection of proverbs and folk tales as recorded from the mouths of the natives. The translation of the Bible into Ga was finally completed and published in 1866. The publication of the primer from the 1860s onwards accelerated the development and growth of Ga literacy. The various editions are a treasure trove, which constitutes the earliest documentation of the cultural, sociological, historical, and intellectual traditions of the Ga people. Equally significant is Reverend G.C. Zerweck's Akonta Wolo, school arithmetic book in Ga, together with a handbook for teachers published in 1876. The hope and confidence in the development of the Ga language was expressed by the German mission linguist Johannes Christaller in October 1889, and this is instructive. He says, "May the Ga language, on which much labor has been bestowed already, continue to be cultivated, and may the faithful use of the books printed in it produce much fruit." So Bible translation and its implication for nation building. Mr. Chairman, in 2011, when the English people celebrated the 400th anniversary of the King James Version of the Bible, they probably did so more from a sense of cultural pride than from a commitment to God's word. I felt that something similar should have occurred when in 2016, the Bible Society of Ghana celebrated 150th anniversary of the translation of the Bible into Ga. I've observed in my writings that the Ga Bible is the single largest encyclopedia of the Ga language, being a repository of most of the Ga words that are long extinct and those still in circulation. I've also sought to argue that most of the words used in translation are pre-Christian, by which I mean that these were vocabulary being spoken long before the advent of the gospel. In other words, the translators did not coin words to express the eternal truths of God's word. They looked for and found equivalents in our languages to convey what God intended for us. This by itself is an indication that God preceded the missionaries into the mission field he was sending them into, already known by a local name, Atar Nanyumo. We are gradually beginning to discover how a close and a more nuanced reading of the scriptures in our mother tongues reveal things that are not really accessible in the English Bible, owing to the abstract nature of English words. A couple of examples may be helpful at this point. As Christians, we are conversant with the English word sin, sin, and preachers often trace the word to its Hebrew and particularly the Greek origins without paying much attention to the Ga word isha. Isha. We are, however, aware that the root word sha, which means rotten, rancid, spoiled, evil, and corrupted, is part of a configuration of several Ga words, and as you can see projected on the screen. So you have yin sha, hime sha, na sha, yemo sha, chui sha, nani sha. These describe various parts of the human body, and bisha, bosha, kosha, kochasha. These are words that portray various aspects of Ga folk and social institutions. Freedom of speech and the attendant democratization of the airwaves have brought in their wake the harmful effects of loose talk. Yomosha, or loose talk, is, however, part of the depraved human nature that a reading of the Bible reveals. If there's one single word that has baffled politicians and for which they seem not to have developed an effective version, it is corruption. It seems to defy all legal prescriptions and formulations owing to its very nature. Our own languages teach us that corruption lies at the very roots of human nature, and the antidote to curing the destruction it unleashes in the society may well lie not only in the passing of bills, but in the religious and spiritual realms as well. And here, the role of the church cannot be overemphasized. The other word which demands equal attention is emoheili, a word that translates the Greek pistis. The English word faith is so abstract that it fails to establish the concreteness of the meaning as portrayed in the Hebrew and Greek expressions, and as shown in the way it is conveyed in Ga. Hemoheili, like tree equivalent jidi, literally means take and eat. Hemonoi. It is a word that is deeply rooted in Ga religious and cultural tradition. Words from which hemoheili probably derives include wonyeli and tufanyeli. And our understanding of Jesus' discourse with the crowd and his disciples in John chapter 7 is enhanced from a reading of the Bible in Ga, from the reading of the text in Ga. Now, cultivating the Ga language beyond Bible translation. I now turn attention to specific ways in which the Ga language was cultivated other than Bible translation in the 18th and 19th centuries. I focus primarily on the various editions of the Ga Primer and interrogate the thought forms as captured in sections of the books. I begin first with the definition of language as given in the 1892 Primer. And here it says, Yuemoji wawala susumo jemmo, ni anuo, ni angma yewolono, ni akanio. That is the definition. Now this can be translated roughly as the thoughts that emanate from the metaphysical being, that is the soul, the spirit, and the psyche, audibly expressed or uttered and noted in writing to be read. The ontological foundations on which language is grounded is stated thus, quote, Manko yuemo akeyuo imumu. Alo esu ni nyumboke hale. Ene wo shiambo ni manko yuemo ko laaji o shiambo hu ni esu ke emumu ke iwale hu laaji o jino. The language of a people, translated, the language of a people is the means by which their soul or spirit is identified. It is also the instrument by which a people's God-given character is measured. The gradual withering or loss of a people's language will inevitably result in the loss of their soul and their strength. This is 1892. Herein lies the nexus between the cognitive functions of the brain and human consciousness. Language, it appears to me, undergets this vital connection. Human language is therefore a matter of the heart and soul. Its study goes beyond syntax and morphology, the appreciation of grammatical and linguistic niceties, and reveals the quintessence of the human person. 3 basic reasons are given in a 1904 primer for lack of appreciation and proper use of one's language. The first is when a person is uncivilized or unenlightened. The second is when a person is lazy and slow in conceptualizing his or her thoughts in his or her mother tongue. Sheer pride and arrogance are identified as the third reason. It is instructive that one of the hallmarks of a civilized person is when one possesses a sound knowledge of one's customs and cultural traditions and has the potency to articulate his or her thoughts fluently in the indigenous language. It is revealing that as far back as 1904, concerns were being expressed at the rate at which loan words were being used by speakers of the Ga language. Rather than cultivate the habit of using indigenous expressions or as creating a vocabulary from existing sources to describe an occurrence or phenomenon, some find it easier to borrow language from alien sources. Now, cultivating Ga language in scholarly disciplines. Mr. Chairman, the primer goes on to give us an indication of what could have occurred if a conscious and deliberate effort had been made to cultivate the Ga language in the various disciplines of human endeavor. I shall attempt in this section of the lecture to examine language use in specific subject areas and demonstrate how this can contribute to knowledge and human advancement, and thereby sustain the use of the Ga language in a medium of instruction and scholarship. Human anatomy and the biological sciences. The various parts of the human body, as listed in the 1892 primer, gives an inkling of how Ga people conceptualize the human body and how the biological sciences as a discipline could have evolved if the vocabulary had been cultivated. The list itself was not exhaustive, but it nevertheless laid the foundation for pupils to wrestle with concepts undergirding the functionality of the human body from a purely Ga perspective. It is to be noted that this was at a period when books in the English language were available, and probably there was no need at the time to reinvent the wheel. An attempt has been made here, as evidenced in the list, to segment the various parts of the body. So you have Yitohini, the head and its components. Ninehini, the components of the head. Nanehini, the parts that constitute the leg. And the internal parts of the body such as flufla, the lungs, tree, heart, mlebo, liver, musumkotoku, that is the stomach sac. Musumlini, that's the intestines, the anson, the gray matter of the brain. So they were consciously developing the scientific vocabulary as far back as the 19th century. Diseases of the human body that were listed include Ichobamu, that is the headache, Intoblo, measles, and Atridi, malaria. Conceptually, there's a stark difference between Atridi, as understood by our forebears, and how the same disease was conceived by Europeans. Atridi, as used in Akan, and we share the same linguistic background with the Atridi, derives from the tree word eti, that is the head, suggesting quite clearly that the disease has something to do with the human head. It is understandable how headache then becomes one of the early visible symptoms of arthritis. The word malaria, which translates arthritis, derives from two medieval Italian words, mal, bad, and aria, that's the air, meaning bad air. Europeans thought that the disease was caused by foul air and associated it with mangrove swamps and marshy areas, until the discovery of the parasite in 1880 by the French army surgeon Charles Laveran. Whereas kwashiorkor, a protein deficiency disease of children, has made its way into the medical world as part of scientific vocabulary, arthritis is yet to make its way into the medical books. Arithmetic, geography, and the environment. The supercilious but tacit assumption that an African language was never likely to become of any practical use in civilization was given a lie with the publication of G.C. Zerweck's Akonta Agbogbolo. In this arithmetic book, published in 1876, had very complex mathematical terms expressed in Ghana. So you have Kojin Edwe, ni Liamoin, ke Kojin Fen Yoibo. That's the way they describe square. Kojin Edwe, ni Liamoin, ke Kojin Fen Yoibo. Square. Kojin Edwe, ni Liamoin Enyo, ke Kojin Fen Yoibo. Rectangle. Kutruku, that is the circle. Kumoyakwan, that's fractions. Kojin Edwe Ashishifamu, square roots. Oshiki, Shishifamu, cubic roots. Shikon Susumoye Chomo, that's geometry. Now, we've used the English terms since colonial times as a medium in conceptualizing abstract figures and mathematical formulas, and think it is virtually impossible to do mathematics and its related disciplines in Ghana, or any African language for that matter. And yet, this was being done in the Gold Coast by the support of German missionaries in the mid-19th century. And what I've related is also in Chi, it's in Ebe. Part 1 of Zerweck's book, for instance, has clear instructions on how to conceptualize figures, and the Ghana expression is profound. Boni ashon yiboye yedwemomli. Boni ashon yiboye yedwemomli. The verb shon is variously understood to mean to create, to mold, to conceive, to formulate, or to conceptualize. Dwemo is the noun form of the verb dream, to think. It is revealing then how the cerebral activity of the mind, and this in itself is a function of human innovativeness, is responsible for the creation of Yiboy, that is the numbers. Educationists are unanimous in the observation that the phobia expressed by many students for mathematics can well be traced to a weakness in their grasp of the English language, and by extension to the way mathematical problems are conceptualized and formulated. And the matter came to the fore in a discussion quite recently when Mr. Angel Kabunu gave an interview to an Accra-based FM station. In a discussion, he made the point that some mathematical terms like trapezium are so scary enough to drive the fear of God into some students. Trapezium. It is pertinent at this point, the chairman, to recall a project in the 1990s embarked upon by the Teacher Education Division of the Ghana Education Service in collaboration with GTZ that spearheaded the production of literature for subjects in Ghanaian languages to be used in our school. I recall a statement in one of the textbooks written in Ebe for the study of mathematics as a subject, and I quote, "The most outstanding feature of Let's Do Mathematics, Minamiastro Akonta, is the use of the child's mother tongue as the medium of instruction. For the first time in Ghana, instructional material for the teaching and learning of mathematics in grade 2 is being provided in Ghanaian languages. Young children, especially in lower primary, will understand the terms, concepts, and ideas better if they're taught in their mother tongue. Therefore, Let's Do Mathematics contributes to the implementation of our national language policy, which calls for the use of languages, local languages, as the primary medium of instruction for the first 3 years of primary school. What this statement failed to acknowledge, as I've sought to demonstrate, is that as far back as the 19th century, there were already in existence maths books in Twi, Ga, and Ebe, accompanied by handbooks for teachers. And you find some of these books if you visit our library at Akutu Crystala. It is obvious that the term geography, as used in the 1895 edition of the primer, is a loan word. The issue brings to the fore discussions within linguistic circles on the creation and use of technical and scientific terms in the various African languages. Borrowing of concepts has been with us for a long time, as evidenced in both European languages, and the Ga language is no exception in this regard. What is important, though, is the contribution that a study of, say, geography in Ga makes to the subject worldwide. And by the way, I'm told that the teacher has been teaching geography in Twi for some years now, in one of the leading senior high schools in the Eastern region, with stellar results. It is pertinent to ask, for instance, how Husui boundaries were determined in the past, particularly when agencies of the United Nations are inundated in recent times with boundary disputes. A significant aspect of geography and environmental space in the Ga littoral has to do with rivers, lagoons, and lakes. The demise of these freshwater bodies has meant an erosion of Ga memory and cultural identity. So Kweshi, Sango, Sakumu, Chemu, Kole, Klote, they've all vanished or are on the verge of extinction. And sooner than later, they would cease to be mentioned. Groups like Osabu and Bobu that offered space for sacred religious rites and rituals have either disappeared or they are at the point of being run over by estate developers. Equally disturbing is the wrong spelling and mispronunciation of place names in Accra. A tendency which has a potency of wiping out any remaining memories of the Ga state and heritage. An example that rarely comes to mind is the location of the University of Ghana. The suggestion has been proffered that the name Legon literally means hill of knowledge, Nilegon. This is certainly an error which owes to a misspelling of the word and subsequently its pronunciation. And I've tried to produce a map of the mid-19th century where you find Legon plotted right on the sketch. So from Osu, you go through Legon, because there's a village on the hill. So it's in existence long before the 20th century. As I said, this certainly is an error which owes to a misspelling of the word and subsequently its pronunciation. An indication that the place name has nothing to do with the university it became associated with much later is because Legon appears in historical and missionary records. The Basel missionaries, Johannes Zimmermann, Johannes Changa, and Locher give a vivid picture of Legon in their various reports to Basel, dating from about the 1850s onwards. The name is listed in the 1895 edition of the Ga Primer, among several others in Accra, and these hilly place names include Apraku Gondin, Glea Gon, Makewa Gondin, Anya Gondin, Asofan Gondin, Ayawaso Gon, and Amrahia Gon. Others which are more familiar are Okoya Gon, Sonny Yagon, and Clan Gon. In a seminal work, Religion and Medicine of the Ga People, published in 1937, Margaret Field confirms that Legon, with Okakwe, Ajangote, and Lama, were among the several hills that littered the borders of the Accra Plains. Field's assertion sheds light on the idea that Legon was formerly a place of worship of Le, one of the gods of the La people, who originally belonged to the Le ethnic group that worshipped several animals, including the snake, the hyena, and then the leopard. So the Ghana have a proverb, therefore ye ebiton. And we'll talk about it later on. Let me proceed. The mispronunciation of another place name, Wogon, has given the impression that the name derives from the domestic fowl, wo. I must note that the place has gained notoriety because of hooliganism associated with by-elections in the area quite recently. Wo, properly understood, is the bush cow, or the dwarf buffalo, found in West Africa. It is known in several parts of Ghana. It occupies an important part in Ghana religious thought, with the horns being used for twin rites and festivals. Ghana people believe that for every set of twins on earth, a corresponding pair of bush cow spirits is believed to exist in the sky. Several other place names in Accra, including Ajina. These days I hear being said Ajigano. Interestingly, that is our village, and my family head is here. Ajigano. There's no Ajigano. And that's the way it's spelled. And instead of Jowulu, I hear Jowulu. They have similarly been corrupted. I'm sure if people knew what Jowulu meant, they would not have built in that part of Accra in the first place. I was reliably informed by one of the leading ministers in the First Republic that the entire stretch of land from Jowulu to what we now call Atumata Forest was originally earmarked as a forest reserve. And when the military seized power in the 60s, they started selling the land. That's how come it's become a plush place. But those who live in the area know too well what I'm talking about. Our forefathers knew it was a great valley, not a great dance. And so people shouldn't build there. It is not too hard to find what led to the mispronunciation of place names like Jowulu. The late arrival of what I call the elusive Ghana characters, and or, may be responsible for the corruption. Hitherto, these words were represented with E underlined. So E underlined is O underlined is O, with the two letters, as I said, underlined respectively. And this came very late in the late 1920s. Until then, we never had a character never had a character O, and this has continued. Now the use of proper names. One notable area of concern we need to address in raising our consciousness in nation building is the writing and pronunciation of proper names. For GMO, the Ghana naming ceremony is one of the most elaborate in Ghana. Until you survived the 8th day after birth and were formally outdoored and given a name, you are reckoned not to have existed. If a child received a name and he died afterwards, he took along the name with him or her to the realms beyond the grave. Each of the clan houses in the Ghana traditional area has 2 sets of names for both males and females. The first generation names and then the second generation names. A Ghana name, therefore, gives a person an identity and a sense of belonging. It is always possible to tell a person's position by birth among their siblings and to trace where they hail from. It is a matter of grave concern, therefore, when a Ghana name is not used at all in identifying a person, or worse still, when the name is written wrongly and pronounced as such. So, Tete and Tete. So my name is Tete. Now, these are, for instance, the first and second born males, respectively, in some Ghana communities. In spelling these names, the Ghana orthography has completely been ignored, with the letter A being replaced with E. The Europeanized version, Tete and Tete, often found in official records, bear no semblance whatsoever to Ghana tradition, because Y and H are superfluous. They are not sounded. The first E in Tete and both E's in Tete were clearly intended to be pronounced following the English orthography. Several other names, including Akwete and Akwete, have been corrupted through improper spelling and pronunciation. Pronouncing these names have become a Herculean task, particularly for non-Ghan speakers. And it should be noted that it is culturally alienating to be called names which do not sound Ghan. Oral tradition, history, and media. Early literature in the Ghan language laid the foundation for the documentation of oral traditions, history, and the creation of media space. The primates, for instance, were being read long before Karainov published his History of the Gold Coast and Asante in 1895, a work which has been celebrated as the first written on any region in Africa by an indigene. Rindolph's history has been cited here because it could have been of greater benefit if the Ghana version had been published alongside the English edition. The Ghana version has now been published alongside a translation in English in 2 volumes and edited by German scholar Heinz Hauser-Renner in what he calls New Annotated Edition of Rindolph's History of the Gold Coast and Asante. And if you are looking for copies, you'll find them in the University of Wisconsin-Madison Library in the US. I wonder how many Ghana people have seen it. This is the Ghana text, and you can find it in the US. The primates, unlike Rindolph's history, give us a feel of Ghana historiography of the earliest times in the Ghana language. The other source document which deserves mention is Johannes Zimmermann's A Grammatical Sketch of the Accra or Ghana language, which recorded, among others, events prior to the British bombardment of Ghana coastal towns in 1854. Part of this pioneer news reporting carried an enigmatic phrase, "Pau Pau Toi Pau," which Zimmermann said was used by speakers of great assemblies of the people for political purposes. The substance of the expression may be lost to the present generation, but it has nevertheless been documented for posterity. Zimmermann's dictionary and the primates share between them a collection of news items which have been preserved as historical material through oral tradition and a sizable anthology of proverbs and stories. As a precursor to Shika Inshona Christopher Asaji Madilo, that is a Christian messenger in Ghana. These documents laid the foundation for the creation of indigenous newspapers in the Ghana language like Manstralo, which has since become extinct. Mr. Chairman, these examples that I've attempted to give in the Ghana language, as I said, applies to the Twi and then to the other languages. You can find the primates in the Twi language, you can find it in the other language. The argument is that we haven't pursued this far enough. And if you come to the institute, you find these books. Now, re-engaging the issues, I'm bringing my lecture to a close. It is about 4 decades ago since the Kenyan novelist Ngugi wa Thiong'o wrote his play Kaitani Udraba Ini, that's the devil on the cross, in Gikuyu. And quite recently, in the month of February and March, the BBC played a documentary on an interview Ngugi granted to the BBC on his writings, especially the use of the Gikuyu language. Now, although Heinemann was initially hesitant in publishing this play, the sales outstripped any other book he had hitherto printed. The Kenyan government banned the book because they thought it was politically subversive. Wathiongo was incarcerated and had to spend a year behind prison bars. Here in this story is a remarkable resemblance of what took place 500 years ago during the Protestant Reformation. It is not entirely surprising that 15,000 copies of the book in an African mother tongue could sell within a space of 8 months. What is revealing, though, is the propensity towards the acquisition of knowledge that the publication unleashed. The English language could not have given the Kikuyu people this deepened sense of social and political consciousness, given the same period of time. The issues to engage here are twofold. First is the erroneous impression that a credible African epistemological system can be created only within a Western intellectual framework. Second, that publishing in any African language is a wasteful venture. What invariably turned out to be a threat to the Kenyan government of Daniel Arap Moi was knowledge produced by ordinary people using indigenous resources without reference whatsoever to any Western political ideologies. The Kikuyu people themselves were the point of reference and key stakeholders in the construction of that narrative, with Wathiongo, a Western-trained scholar, as their students. Given the work of the Basel Mission in the 19th century and what occurred in Kenya in the 1980s, we can only conjecture the Ghana people, and for that matter, Akan and other people, would have made great strides in their march towards progress if the development of the languages had been maintained. And I say this for all languages in Ghana and for Africa. In other words, true economic, social, cultural, and political emancipation can only occur on the crest wave of a people's language. The fruit that was produced as a result of the cultivation in the 19th century of the Ghana language in the various disciplines now lies buried and rotten away under an avalanche of European memory. Language is integral to memory. It is a fundamental and basic unit block of the memory storehouse. Our sense of history and identity as human beings therefore derive from our memory bank. To the extent that we deal not with our own languages, but rather with languages of the empire builders, we are potentially or perpetually set adrift in the boundless ocean, completely out of touch with who we are. Ngugu wa Thiong'o observed that colonialists succeeded in planting their memory in every facet of our lives, our landscape, intellect, and the method we employ in our research and scholarship. As he rightly noted, quote, a name given and accepted in memory planted on the body of its graceful or unquestioning recipient, the body becomes a book, a parchment, where ownership and identity are forever inscribed, unquote. The point has earlier on been made that the Ghana landscape is gradually yielding to features that are obliterating any memories of the past. This has occurred mainly through misspelling and mispronunciation of Ghana names, and sometimes a replacement of the name altogether. M.E. Krop Dakubo, an article on the linguistic prehistory and historical reconstruction of the Ghanaian migrations, is germane to the discussion. The only reason for an attempt at a reconfiguration of that history was because the place names at the time she wrote some 45 years ago were still intact. The article suggests quite clearly that the language of the people is inexorably linked to their identity, heritage, and their very survival. Skeptics who have very little confidence in their mother tongues maintain that African languages are so far behind that instead of investing scarce resources and wasting our time in resuscitating them, the concentration should rather be on European languages, which have developed the capacity to handle the various academic disciplines, especially in science and technology. The cynics may have been proved wrong when in May 2003, a Kenyan graduate student presented his master's thesis on bio-intensive agriculture to the Department of Crop Science at Cornell University. The entire thesis was written in the Kikuyu language. In April 2017, Esther Nana Anima Yafi Akinting, submitted a doctoral thesis. Said ye wodi akan kasa di juma ene enemrei were radio and TV so entirely written in the Twi language to the University of Ghana, Lagos, the first of its kind in the university. In 2004, Regnum Africa published my book, Yesu Monunjo, in the Ghana language, the first book in the Nyamedua series, a project aimed at encouraging theologians to reflect and write in African mother tongues. The issues, the chairman, that I've attempted to discuss in this paper have been the concern of the Center for the Advanced Studies of African Societies, CASIS. Professor Kwesi Kwapra, who is the director of this institute, has been a strong advocate of how African societies can use the languages in the promotion and growth of the economies in much the same way that the ancient tigers have done with the languages. It should be obvious to students of history how these issues mirror what occurred some 500 years ago in the Protestant Reformation spearheaded by Martin Luther. It is within the context of this discussion that we can appreciate concerns related to indigenous language use among the Ghanaian people, and how a conscious and deliberate use of these languages can lead to the restoration of hope and dignity. I thank you very much for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we will need to soothe the atmosphere with some music.
Oh, the invitation to come. Oh, you are alone. I hope I said it properly.
You see? Oh.
Thank you also to
Language.
our friends. I see Reverend Dr. T. Yamba and his wife there. Thank you. Faithfully coming all the time. I see Prof. E.A. Wellington and a number of others. But we shouldn't forget the dance decorum. Year after year after year. They haven't forgotten their friendship with Reverend Professor Bediako. Thank you very much, Nancy. And I say thank you. There's some of you that maybe I can't see, but all of you, we're very grateful that you could join us this evening. And I hope that it hasn't been a waste of time for you. I hope that for each one of you, it will be food for thought as we reflect on language, education, nation building, especially these days when even the English language that we know, we're beginning to get other versions with the slangs and so on. So let's reflect on these and see what can do about it. I'd like to encourage you all, if you have the booklet, if you look at the back side, you see the programs that the Institute offers. Master of Arts, MA Intelligent Vision, and the various options, the MTH, and then the PhD. We are still admitting students. We have extended the deadline, so if you know somebody who is interested in applying for any of these programs, please encourage them to do so. You see the website and the email addresses on the back, so you can use that. Let me also announce that as we celebrate the life and ministry of Reverend Professor Bediako, would like to invite those who would like to take a copy of what we call the commitment form to continue the legacy of this, of our founder director. So if you'd like to have a copy of the commitment form to contribute to the Institute and the building of the Institute, please don't hesitate to do that. Mr. Benjamin Yamwa and others are back there. If you're interested, you can either raise your hand or at the end you can pick one from the table. So please consider being a partner of the Institute by committing to it. Lastly, let me say that there will be refreshments after we close, so don't run off. Hang around, there will be refreshment at the back there, and please make sure that you refresh yourself before you go. I'd now like to invite Right Reverend Michael Bossman to give us a closing prayer.
Oh, okay.
He's administrative bishop of the Methodist Church of
Methodist Church, Ghana.
There we go, Almighty Father, let's ask and pray. Thank you, Lord Jesus, for today. This is the day that you have made and our hearts rejoice. Thank you once again for helping us to see, looking back, to see forward, as we stand on the shoulders of giants like Professor Kwame Bediako. that Lord will be inspired to once again look at our local languages, our vernacular, and also see what we can contribute in our society to your glory and honor. We pray that what we have heard, which has inspired us, will also urge us on as a people in Ghana and as a government to look at language again, the vernacular language again, the use of it, especially in the basic schools. It is our prayer, the Lord, this lecture will not end here, but will continue to inspire everyone, and that actions will be taken that will move our vernacular languages forward. We pray and thank you once again for Professor Kwame Bediako's life. Thank you for the inspiration that he continues to give many years on, 10 years on. We are still being inspired by him. We are most grateful to you, Lord, for giving him to us as a gift. We thank you for all the lecturers at ACI and all the students, and all who make life there very comfortable and progressive. Thank you once again for the lecture and the lecturer, Professor Lai, asking for more grace as he continues in these endeavors in languages. We are also most grateful to all who attended. As we leave this place, commit ourselves in your hands, praying that you guide and direct us. And even as we look at our languages, we will see more clearly. Yet our city breathe, what do shra, what then be train, or Casamoa, what they are to be asked for. I am Suyakampi. In Tibi, Sa in Kamuji, your part of the Salvation Piara, ye happy, Maduno, a sea, a so, while we share in between so. My Akuma enter him, you ye, yes, so saying, Shall ACI Israel for Jesus Christ to be one. And the peace of God which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God, of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. The blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with us now and always. Amen.
Amen.
It was a very, very good lecture, very interesting. Professor Lai did so well. I mean, he did not disappoint us as usual. I even thought that there were parts of it that he could have gone deeper, but for the sake of time, you know, especially in explaining some of the root words of what we have come to know in Christianity, like faith and GD and the concept of sin and corruption. Those parts were so interesting that if he had gone even deeper, I would have seen how very instructive the lecture was. So thank you, he did well.
I think it was a very enlightening lecture, bringing our minds to many things, especially the importance of understanding and using your language, because there are some concepts that you can never get in someone else's language. But for me, it also raises a huge issue. The way we are not speaking our local languages to our children these days. And I ask myself, how far can mother tongue theology go if the very children who are coming up do not even understand the basics? It was very good.
I think it was a good one, very educative, very elucidating. The Reverend Professor Lai was in his element. He touched on very important things that have to do with African theology. Draws our minds back to some of the things that Professor Bediako talked about in terms of theologizing that is based on African worldview. And he touched on major issues of language and how the African languages, basically looking at Ga, but possibly the Twi, the Ewe language, were used by the Basel missionaries in providing quality education and building a nation together, things that we have neglected, which I'm sure if we go back to them, we would be building our nation better. and probably dealing with the very issues that we have found difficult to find answers for. So yes, I think it was a very wonderful lecture, and I thank God that I was here.
You know that there was a lot of history of what has been done already, and I'm not sure that many people are aware of what work has been done already. And I'm not sure that the current generation believe that we can do a lot of work in our indigenous language. So I think this is an eye-opener, which we'll have to find a way of bringing down to people at different levels, secondary schools, university, to engage them in this discourse. So that's what I'm going away with.
I think it's been so wonderful, especially recalling or reflecting on the ideas and issues of Prof. Bediako and the legacy he's left. And the language actually is very, very vital. The former president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, says that when you speak to a person, a man, in the language he speaks or he understands, you actually speak to the heart of the person. So once we understand this and then we also speak in the language of the people, we speak to their hearts. And that brings meaning when it comes to communication. They are able to respond positively. So for me, language is very vital. And like he really, spoke about, we need to take it to the next level. Apart from the basic level, we should also make sure that to the secondary schools and then even to the universities, because some have written it and then they've made it. And ACI is doing very well. We pray it will take, ACI will go far, and then whatever has been, actually has started will also be exposed to the world. So the good things in the ACI will be enjoyed by others.
Somebody was just asking me, so where did we go wrong? And I was telling him, maybe we need to go back, retrace our steps, and then take a look at some of the documents I've made reference to. I think that would be good for starters. So we would know the methods they use, because I think they are still relevant. If we must move forward, then we must go backward. Anybody who wants to go, higher, you have to come down before you jump. So you need to take some steps backwards and then go and look at those things and see how those ideas, how they use them, and see whether we can plant some of them in our modern ways of doing things. I always believe that there's a way forward, even including some of the world of technology. There's a way in which we can go for the so-called indigenous knowledge systems. For quite a number of countries have started going back to it. The Chinese, the Indians, because they believe that there's some wisdom which shouldn't be thrown away. So I believe that there's need to go back and then take a look at what our forefathers and foremothers thought about, how they express themselves, our proverbs, our folklore, and it's only in the languages. I mean, you can't do without the languages. So let's go back and then revisit the languages and some of the early materials that they use. And I think we can move a bit, from where we are. That's what I think.
Finally, what can government begin? When does government begin at the level of engagement to ensure that these things gradually is reflected in our syllabus? How do we go about this?
You see, I made reference to the project by GTZ with the Ministry of Education, the non-formal division. They started it. I don't know what happened. I wanted to follow up because they were doing it. This project was in the languages, and I think that is what is going to enhance the literacy, the general mass literacy, because it is when you have started somebody in a language he understands that you can even introduce, other languages at a point. Otherwise, our education is a bit lopsided. We're always doing catch up, following the Western world, and they're always ahead of us. But we can break away when we go back to those indigenous languages. So government should reintroduce those books. I don't know why they stopped them. I hope they are using them. So I believe government should retrace its steps and go back to that project and start using those books.